Okay, all you armacologists out there. Today we're going to get into something I know a lot of people have been waiting for, but it's taken me quite a while to get a hang of it, so it's taken a while to put out the toot, but I think I've got at least the basics that I can share with you. So today we're going to talk about buildings and roadways and how to really spruce up your Arma 3 server with some custom buildings. But today we're going to learn how to make a building and how to get it into Arma. Making stuff with Gaddington. So it pretty much all begins here in Blender. And first you want to lay out the general dimensions of the building you're intending to build. Usually this is based on the plot of land you've chosen for it, maybe some surrounding architecture. In this case, I'm doing the downtown Tanawa. I'll probably say it both ways during the course of this video, but I'm doing the downtown high-rises that I've turned into my hospital in a Tanawa situation. So, Tanawa situation. God damn it. So, I get my basic dimensions here. Now I do this via trial and error for the most part by loading this up, getting my whole piece together, exporting that to a P3D. Here we're going to do the res block. Taking that all over to my object builder file, right? And obviously there's more stuff in this object builder file because I've already done this. I'm going to walk you through it, not necessarily have you watch me do every step of the process because, wow, that would take a long time. That would be a really ugly video. So I'm going to basically point you in the right direction, let you do the really heavy lifting, but hopefully this gets you on the right track anyway. So here you can see I've loaded up my general size object, and I did a bit of trial and error as well already. This is a good time to start setting up your config files as well. Let me bring those in real fast so you can see what we're working with on that. It's a good thing to kind of work with that as you go along. Alright guys, so we're going to go over the config.cpp a little bit for buildings, right? Obviously, config patches, this goes in pretty much everything you make. It's up to you what you want to call it. It's just simply a game identifier. You can define versions, whatever you want in here, and then you want to point it at the name of your mod PBO. And if you feel like it, you can even throw in your authorship. Config vehicle classes, this is simply to identify sides. Faction model classes, this is the same thing. It allows you to separate vehicles or models of any sort into the factions in terms of access. This comes in useful later when you're doing things like doors that only cops can open. Config sounds, this is just noises that I wanted to associate. Obviously the sounds are built into the exact same location as the rest of the mod. I use OGG format because it sounds pretty good. Anyway, then we move on to the actual config vehicles. I know it seems like it should be config buildings or config land or something like that, but it's not. It's config vehicles of a strategic class. So that's how we define a building. Does that make a whole lot of sense? Sure. Then it's the name of your class, whatever you want this building to be defined as. In this case, this is the bank, followed by, of course, strategic config vehicles. This is the bank, and it has all sorts of user actions associated with it. It's got animation sources, which link here back into the Model.cfg, which we'll talk about in just a minute once we get through this file because it's all related. These user actions will appear on the scroll menu when someone's close enough. Within a user action, we of course have the memory LOD that the user action is associated with and the distance from it that a person can be in order to see the user action on the scroll wheel. Then we have the condition in which it will activate on the scroll wheel and be present. In this case, the condition is that the animation to open the vault door is less than or equal to halfway done. So it's pretty much closed in order to open it. And if it is closed, then it goes ahead, or halfway closed at least, then it gives the option to open the vault. But this is a whole script, which of course has other things associated with it where we check to see if there's, well, we can open that up too. Scripts, open the vault. See, and so in here we have the script to open the vault, which checks to see what sorts of objects. Do they have a hacking device or a bank drill or a blast drill or blast charge to bust open the bank? And in that case, what's the method of entry? Well, boom, it's going to come down here and run a switch. The switch is going to set off sounds and noises and do whatever the hell it is you want it to do. This is really sort of freeform stuff. It is C++ syntax, but it's also Arma 3 syntax, so there's going to be some stuff about it that's a little bit different. But if you've been playing with Arma 3 long enough to be watching my video and find it relevant to you, then you know what's going on once you hit the SQF level. This is just how you would execute that script. It's a real nice, clean little boop, and there you go. The script's in the mod and everything. Obviously, this is not a method that will protect your stuff. So if somebody comes and downloads your mod, they've got your scripts, they've got everything they need to upload it on their own server. But that gets into my whole philosophy of building. I don't think it's really necessary to try and protect your stuff when you're building for these games, because Bohemia is the only person who owns it, the only person who can put real legal claim on it. So no matter how you want to justify it or what money you might think is involved, you are building for a public community of people who are just interested in building this stuff or just interested in playing these games. And it's, unfortunately for the artist, usually not going to pay off in any major way. So if you're watching my videos and thinking, I'm going to get rich off of modeling these, then you might not have as much success as you would think. Let's go into Model.cfg because it's super important. At this point, I'm going to review it. Later, we're going to go back through it once it makes more sense and we actually have our building together and we're linked to it. So in here, in the Model.cfg, you need to define your skeletons. I have two buildings that have animations applied to them right now. One is the bank and one is the tower. The skeleton is the names of the different components in the res LOD, the geometry LOD, and the roadway LODs that need to move. And then they all need to link back to a main component, which is going to be called in the animation. Bear with me. It'll make a lot more sense when we come back through it the second time. This is the bones, or animation components, for the bank, bones for the elevator, and then of course I have two towers that I've built, so the second tower gets basically the exact same bones, but slightly different names and stuff. These are the different names of the roadway LODs, the geometry LODs, and the resolution LODs that I need to move in order to have the whole thing look and act accordingly. Then you come down here to CFG models. This was all CFG skeletons. We're configuring the bones that we're going to move. CFG models, we need to call those skeletons and we need to section them again. This is basically the exact same thing, except that we're saying we're using these skeletons that we just defined and we're linking the exact same components. So this list here in CFG models is pretty much the exact same list as here in CFG skeletons. I know that might seem a little dense. Once we've got the skeleton redefined in the model section, however, is when we start on the animations. Animations are defined like this. For open vault door, and the animations, you can just Google the animation names for the Arma 3 animations. You know what, I'll include that in the comments, or I'll try to remember to include that in the comments. But these are predefined movement types. They can be rotations, translations, and something else, and the way you define them is usually around a point or a memory LOD, and that is how it sees its motion. So if you do a radial or a rotation, you can define it around a memory LOD that's offset and have something slide out of the way in a rotating manner. It's something I'll let you play with because there is a lot of different stuff going on with it. But for example, translation Z, because in Arma, X is forward, Y is sideways, and Z is up if you're standing there, right? So translation Z, no. It's not like that. It's X is forward, Y is up, and Z is to your side. There's some, I don't know. At any rate, the coordinate system is really weird because Z goes sideways and Y goes upwards. What are you going to do, right? At any rate, there's a bunch of these types. You can go and you can find the one that you need. You define it, give it a name. Remember open vault door? Now we go back to the config. Here's the open vault door. And it's defined up here in the animation sources class that comes right before the user actions in order to execute it. So this is the structure, boom, boom, that you would use in order to create an animation in the user action scroll menu. You got to select the component that you want it to be linked to. Remember, we went back and we defined all this shit, right? Well, component 3 is linked to the vault door. The vault door is a res and geometry lod, which are both named vault door. That's bad practice, and I did that early, but this will move component 3 at the minimum, no meters, and at the maximum, 9 meters. Offset when it's not moved is 0. Offset when it is moved is 9, which is to say if you put in a value of 0, it's not going to move at all. If you put in a value of 1, it's going to move 9 meters. I know that seems a little complicated. It's something else you'll experiment and get used to. But then when you call it here in the user action, you set the animation. This is an example of just directly calling the animation. You set the animation to 0, right? In this case, it's closing the door. So in this case, it'll set the animation to 0. Up here on Open Vault, we'll have to go back in here to see it, but when you succeed, it sets the Open Vault door to 3. 3 will take it a portion of its travel in. You'll have to play with these numbers because they're definitely not an exact science. And that's really all I can say about that. I'm sure they are an exact science. I just don't fully understand them. But I found that you have to set that within one of these two numbers that you gave here, or else it just won't do anything. It won't move. And that's pretty much animations. That's it. If you have these 1 skeleton, 2 model config or config models animation components, and 3 config CPP animation sources, then your user actions should work without any real problem. We're going to go over this one more time at the end once we've already got our models together. But let's go back to looking at this big chunk of shit, but within the context of the game to fit our model to the size we have to work with. Okay, so at this point we have loaded basically just a big block or a couple of blocks as a basic reslod into a mod, into a PVO. We've packed all that into a PVO. Again, if you're not with me on that, go ahead and head back and watch some of my previous videos because we go over a lot of this there. So we pack it all into our PVO. In my case, it's RevGats buildings. Load that sucker up. And then we go to wherever we're working. In my case, I'm doing the hospital clinic in downtown Tanoa, which is here. And so we can use these blocks, these big ass blocks, to kind of get an idea of where does our building need to sit within this structure, right? And so when I first, of course, put the blocks in, they were way too big, and I sort of scaled them vaguely off of the little person model that I have, you know, but way too big. So I had to size them down and cut them down, and this is after a lot of sizing and cutting, and I got it to a shape that's like, okay, that actually fits kind of in the space that I have to work with there. So great, we have our blocks. Everybody's super happy about the blocks. We can go ahead and back out of editor, which is where, of course, we loaded all of this up. And we can go back to Blender. Now back in Blender, we have our basic shape and layout. I find the easiest way to sort of see what we're doing at this point is to go into, see, there's my little model person that I use to scale everything. But in wireframe mode, which I go into just by hitting Z, simple as that, you start to load up your geometry LODs. Now, the reason I'm starting at geometry is because geometry defines pretty much how everything else is going to act. So I've seen that starting with your geometry and getting your basic layout set up is the way to go. If you'll recall, all geometry LODs, that's fire geometry, physics geometry, buoyancy geometry, it doesn't matter what kind of geometry it is, all geometry, quote unquote, needs to be closed and non-convex, which is to say it needs to be no gaps in the faces facing outwards and no angles over 180 degrees on the interior faces. We've gone over it before, and I know I'm beating this horse into the ground, but that's how you do it. If you do, at any point, if you break those two rules with a part, it can take a long time figuring out what happens. So I just work with cubes. All of this is just cubes. And I start loading in my different walls and floors and the places I want things to be. And I start getting a feel for my layout. And I look at it from the top down, and it kind of turns into like, you know, almost a draft of how I want the building to be laid out. And I keep adding to it, and I add the small walls that I want all through there. I figure out where I want my rooms. I can move these things around, and you know, it's a pretty handy state to have it all in. So, boom! Now we got a geometry LOD. So let's get rid of this. I think it was this one. Yeah, our outer LOD, right? And then of course we have our foundation LOD, which is just our outer LOD moved down into the ground. Oops. Oh, okay. Move down into the ground there. See? Boom. Just like that. So we can get rid of that. We'll keep our foundation because it's kind of it's an impenetrable surface that will go down into the ground underneath the thing so that you can't climb under the building, basically. And we're looking at our geometry LODs. Pretty clean looking. I'm liking it. Keep in mind, none of these faces overlap with each other. Everything's nice and clean and separated, which means that if you loaded this in as a res LOD, it'd look kind of ugly to be able to see through a lot of those gaps. But that's why we're going to go ahead and make a res LOD. So the next step here is to go ahead and get all of these together, you know, and this is kind of one of the Blender joy factors right here. Oh, Blender, I wish you had a smarter way to do this. If anybody knows of a smarter way to do this or a better key combination that would just let me, you know, kind of go down the whole thing and just take it all in a block, let me know in the comments because that would save me a lot of time. Anyway, we're going to go ahead. We're going to join this stuff. Oh, let's make sure we select, oops, one of the bodies inside of it. We're going to join it. It's all going to become this one, basically. We're going to join it. We're going to set that's Control A to set the location, the rotation, and the scale. We're going to make sure that it's an Arma object with custom distance, custom LOD of 0. Sorry, custom distance LOD of 0. I mangled that. Now we're going to take that and we're going to export that shit as the geometry. I called it clinic geometry because it's just easy for me to remember. We're going to go back and we're going to grab clinic geometry. Where is it? Where is it? There it is. From wherever we saved it. We're going to grab the whole dang thing. We're just going to Control C, and we're going to go back into our hospital clinic, our main sort of final deal here. So the way to go here is just make a new LOD altogether. Give it some properties, call that shit geometry. Now you got a geometry LOD into which you can, well, you know, mine was already built, so I'm just kind of rebuilding over the top, in which you can Control V that geometry LOD, right? You can do this, topology, find components, it'll give you all the components. You can check the convex, make sure there's no red dots in there for convex hulls. And then you can add some mass to it like this. Boom. Doesn't really matter how much mass you add. The mass just kind of anchors it. I mean, you can add a realistic amount, but anything over 200 is just a real solid object. So 200 is probably fine. You'll see here. Boom. So that's the geometry LOD in a nutshell. Now, we had already done a geometry LOD, and I don't know which one is the duplicate. So I'm going to Z it back out here. Bam. All right, so that's the new one. So we're going to kill that one. As you can see, we already had our geometry LOD. Now you're going to want to copy this one to make your physics LOD. You're also going to want to copy this one to make your fire geometry LOD, which is the walls that can't be shot through. Now we're going to move on to the roadway LOD, which is a whole bag of beans in itself, but it's a lot of fun. Roadway LODs only have upward facing faces. So if it shows its face, if you're sitting directly above it, like this in the 7 position in Blender, and you're just looking straight down on something, then a roadway LOD, you're going to see the face of it. But that's the only time. Otherwise, if you're like this, it should just be a line. So the best way to make a roadway LOD, in my opinion, rather than messing around with any kind of squares or anything, is to grab one of your bigger pieces, you know, your foundation pieces here, and go into edit mode. Well, duplicate that bad boy. Boom. So we duplicate it. We go into edit mode on the duplicated one. Gonna Alt and right click on the edges. Shift Alt right click to highlight all the different edges. Delete just the faces. Get those bottom faces out of there too, just by Shift and right clicking on them. And now we have this thing. If we look at it in solid mode outside of wireframe, you see it's just sort of like a one-dimensional, two-dimensional object that faces in a direction. That's a roadway LOD. That's all it is. So when we make some roadway LODs, we're basically just making flat surfaces that define something you can't fall through. In our case, going back to the wireframe so that we can see what's going on, we have floor 1, floor 2, the ramp or stairway going upstairs, and the roof. And those are the places that you can't fall through. Something to note about roadway LODs is they will also prevent rain from falling through. Okay, so now we're going to do the exact same thing with the roadway LODs, which I've named, of course, RWDY for some reason. We're going to select them all. We're going to join them together. We're going to make sure it's an Arma object. We're going to go ahead and Control A, the location, the rotation and the scale. And then we are going to export the hell out of that. Again, just the selection. This is important. If you don't do this, it exports all kinds of stuff. So just the selection only. And we're going to go Clinic Roadways with it. Boom. We're going to open up Clinic Roadways. So we'll open up Clinic Roadways here. And as you can see, it's pretty much just 3 flat objects, right? And we'll do the same thing with it. We're going to Control C. We're going to go back to our hospital clinic and we're going to create a new LOD. We're going to name that sucker. We're going to give it the properties of a roadway. We're going to Control V right in there. And then we'll detect find the components. Boom. That's it. Now, if we wanted to animate these, we would want to rename whatever components we want to animate. We'll go over that a little bit later. I'm even thinking that might be broken into a second video altogether on how to add an animation, but we'll keep brushing on it here. So you'd need a couple of named components here. You also want to name the components in the res LOD for animation, and then geometry, as we've gone over before, always has to have component 01 through component 99 in order to operate correctly, so you won't be renaming any of those. At any rate, now we have our roadways in there on top of our geometry. That's all it takes for roadways, is just to detect the components. You don't have to add anything. So let's move on to our ResLod now. The ResLod is a resolution lod. It's probably one of the longest parts of the process because you have to do the texturing and everything. But the ResLod is what people see. So if you do it quick and dirty like I'm doing, you will see that it comes out looking quick and dirty, and it shows. But if you take a lot of time and really work on that ResLod, that's when you can get the thing looking so good. Because the geometry lod looks however it looks, but the ResLod is what people see. So in this case, I did it pretty fast and dirty for the sake of the tutorial. I've done a bunch of different buildings at this point experimentally, and this is not one of my best, but you know what? That's not what it's about. It's about showing what's going on. So the res usually starts with a piece from the geometry that you can sort of size somewhere in there. You know, I started with my back wall there and I sized it down a bit. And then you start building in based on where your geometry lods are. Well, I just turned them all off so that we could see. But turning them back on, you can see it's overlapping. It's building in the overlapping space that the geometry lod's already laid out. It doesn't matter if your geometry lod and your resolution lod overlap. It only matters if a roadway lod and a geometry lod overlap. That's the only case in which, well, a geometry lod doesn't want to overlap with anything, but a roadway lod and a geometry lod overlapping is bad. Resolution lods can overlap anything. It doesn't even matter as long as it looks good. That's all res lods are about. So in this case, I started with my back wall and stuff, and you can see as I take pieces out from the geometry and add them back in with the res, you'll see how it's basically just refilling with pieces that look good and are textured. In this case, I'm not actually showing much texture because I still have it in Z mode, but let's go ahead and so the res lods we'll add back in here. And this really is the longest part. The resolution lods can take you as long as you want because this is the art. This is the part where you be creative and you use the look and the shadows and the tiling and everything to create whatever sort of outcome you want. It really is the most artistic part, but that also means it's the part that if you don't enjoy, it's probably the very hardest. I personally kind of like it, so it went pretty quick. But it went pretty quick in that it takes about an afternoon. You know, we're talking 2-3 hours of just kind of sitting down and zoning out on it to get it textured. And then, you know, then to get it textured really well, which obviously this is less than really well, is a whole other thing. But this is the ResLod. It's sort of laid out like that. I put some lettering on the front here. That's as simple as importing an SVG and extruding it via a knife project. So that's all that is. It's nothing special. And boom, we have the ResLods for our rough and tumble emergency room. What are we going to do? The exact same thing. We're going to go into Z. We're going to go into wireframe mode. We're going to select all of the ResLods. Once again, if you have a better method of selecting a whole chunk all at once, please tell me. I don't know why. I haven't found one yet, but I guess I feel like it's not so much of an inconvenience that I really need to find a fix for it. You know how that goes? Like, well, you know, I get through it every time. But this really is a stupid way to do it. And so holler at me in the comments. There we go. That's our ResLod. We have the foundation, which is brick. We have all the different aspects and everything. The ResLod just includes everything because it doesn't matter. It just masks over the top. Same deal. We're going to join it. We're going to make sure it's an Arma object. We're going to save its rotation and scale so that everything is in the same position. And we're going to export it again, this time as Clinic Res. Bam. I'm going to export that shit. Obviously, I'm faking a little bit. And, which one is this? And then here, remember we had these blocks that we were using to map it out? No, we're going to, oops, I did that wrong. No, we're going to go and we're going to grab our res here. And we are going to copy paste that bad boy into the new res lod, which now, of course, is outfitted with geometry, geometry physics, roadways, and fire geometry. That's not even touching memory lods or anything, which we'll get into in a second. And we're going to kill this. Boom, we don't need it. We're going to delete these because they're no longer necessary, and we're going to add in the new res lod with all these new components. We're going to find the components, because you always have to find the components, but it already comes with them. I don't know why. I guess I had already found them in... Oh, yeah, I already found them on the other side here. It's up to you where you want to find the components. I usually do it in the final file, just because then you don't end up with overlapping or renamed components. At any rate, boom, now we have the three things into OB. We have the resolution lod, we have the geometry lod, we have all the different methods of geometry lods, we got the roadway lod for the floors and the roof, and we got the fire geometry lod so that you can't shoot through the walls. Looking pretty damn good. So let's talk for just a second about view geometry. View geometry is the exact same thing as the rest of kind of geometries and needs to be the same, meet the same standards. The difference is view geometry is what the AI units can see through. So if you have view geometry in the right place, then they can't see through the walls. It's just a side note, but for a building, view geometry becomes really critical because if you have an artificial intelligence unit standing outside, but you don't have any view geometry applied to your building, they can see straight through it and shoot at you. Now, they might just be shooting the fire geometry wall, but obviously you don't want the AI to see through. So the best way to do that is just make a duplicate of your geometry and come down here to view geometry right at the very bottom. Boom. Now they won't be able to see through the walls. Sometimes, depending on what your mission objective is or why you're building the building, you might also put in geometry flats to represent the floors and the ceilings. They will be able to see through the floors and the ceilings on this building because in the geometry I haven't included any floors or ceilings because there's really no need for them. Well, maybe there is. Well, at any rate, it's a hospital, so I didn't figure there was going to be too many gunfights going down in the hospital, but geometry stops gunfire, and so you might want to put a floor in. I didn't on this. Hopefully people won't shoot through the floors at each other in the fucking hospital. But boom, now we have pretty much the makings of a really nice bit. Let's go ahead and pop a memory lod on there just to demonstrate what's going on with memory lods. Memory lods are real simple. If you're using it to animate a rotation, you want it to be 2 points or a vertex so that you have a rotation axis. If it's X, if it's whatever, if it's like a door hanging on a hinge, it might be the side of the doorway, a vertical axis along which the rotation would happen. If you're putting in an action, then you need something just like a point. To put a point in, you just click somewhere and give it the old insert. Boom. Now we got a point in the middle of the stuff. Kind of click back and forth to see where your point ended up. In this case, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, so we're going to grab it and we're going to move it over here. Right click to grab and move. And I'm going to kind of just move it in the middle there. At this point, it's not going to do anything, but it does demonstrate how you add a memory lod so that you can add an action later. You also have to go and find this component. It's just a single point, easy component, but always rename your memory lods because they will be accessed, and if they are named component, it's going to try and access the geometry lod at the same time. That's going to get really confusing, so always rename your memory lods. We now have pretty much everything in this file that you need to have a nice working building, even in an AI situation. So save it up. Make sure you've saved it. So we're going to load this bad boy up with Tanoa, right? We're going to go and we're going to find our hospital clinic entry that we made using our config file. Boom. We're going to drop it in there. We're going to align it correctly, and we're going to scooch it up next to that building right there. Close as we can, because that's what it's built. That's where it's built to go. And we might need to lift it just a little bit. And we might need to go up in the air in order to get a real good idea of how this thing's meant to be laid down. That's pretty much what I'm talking about. All right, and then you can just go ahead and just put a quick guy down. You know, make a little dude. Hey, Baker, go and check it out for me, right? This is all in the editor. Go tell our little beggar. I think it's important to mention here, this method we just used, finding the asset, which of course has a scope set to 2. Anything you want to show up in the editor menu, set your scope to 2 so that it does show up as public. But find your asset, lay it down, go to quick position. This is all just quick editor stuff, and this applies the same way to editing your mission file for your personal server or MMO or whatever it is you're working with. And that's, you know, boom, look at that. We got ourselves a hospital. Now, there's a lot of nuance, of course, in modeling all this. You know, the glass has RV mats applied to it and everything like that. If you want to go over the glass real quick, I think, you know what, let's go ahead and talk about the glass for a second. To use the glass or to make the glass is actually pretty simple. Way back here in the modeler, you know, in Blender, we go ahead, let's grab one of our glass. Let's grab the top glass. I think it's even named. Oops. Yeah, res roof glass. Okay, so this is the model. The texture that I apply to it is very simply a PNG. A PNG that has like 60% or 40% transparency applied to the entire thing. And that results in the transparency of the glass. But to get the shininess of the glass, over here in OB, you want to add an approved, and again, some of them are named here. You want to add an approved, this is in the texturing window, highlight the component that you want in your ResLod, open up the texturing. All of this should be rudimentary for editing your files at this point. And then put in your PAA. PAA with transparency is simply a PNG dragged into text viewer, then saved as a PAA. It will maintain the transparency from a standard PNG format transparency file. So that's how that's pretty much done. And then in here, you want to find a material. These are all the materials that I got from Arma 3's websites, from Armaholic and stuff like that. None of these are materials that I made myself because I don't really know how you would make these yourself. But there are lots of libraries out there of RVMap materials. Go and find some and test them out and find the ones that work for you and start adding them to your models because they look pretty good when it's all said and done. You add your RVMap, make sure that your path is correct. And now it's going to be a little shinier when we go back in and save it. Of course, now we have to save it, pack it, get everything back in order again, and then we're good to go. Here we are back in Object Builder again. And this is the tower layout. You can see it's a big old tower. It's got its floors and everything, right? And we're going to concentrate on these pieces down here. This is what we want to move. Of course, we're looking at the ResLod right now. But we want this piece here to be what we're going to move upwards. Not only that, we want it to be associated with its same piece in the geometry LOD, right? Because it's going to be basically the same thing, so that you can't walk straight through it or whatever. We're going to want to add a memory point, which is a little bit above it, which is going to be our control point. I think it's Memo 1. Yeah, it's Memo 1, our control point for the elevator. And then roadways. The roadway LODs, as we were looking at before, is there we go. Which is again those 3 units or 4 roadways kind of inside of each other. Now, Object Builder is going to see them all as separate components, which is fair enough. But all of these components need to be mentioned. Here we go, all the way back over into the Model.cfg. in the skeletons. So this is Fisk Tower. This is the Fisk Tower bones in CFG skeletons. This is elevator 02. That is the roadway LOD that we want to be accessing. Come back over here. We have, sorry, road elevator. Sorry, that is, that's the res LOD, I think. Elevator 02. Yeah, so the res LOD is elevator 02. Go back to the CFG. We can see we've immediately gone elevator 02 with component 01. Component 01 being in the geometry LOD, this thing, the same representation of that part in the geometry LOD. So elevator 01 and component 01 are the same in the two different LODs, but remember, geometry always uses the component thing. So now component 01 is what we're going to reference. Sorry, it's right here. Component 01 is what we're going to reference for our movement. We also want to associate the other pieces that are going to need to move, which are roadway 01, road elevator 02, elevator 03. These are the different roadways that we were just looking at. We'll go into the roadways. Elevator 2, 1. See? These are our three roadways that represent those different layers of roadway. So we're going to associate all of those here in the model CFG, component 01. And then component 01 needs to be defined as its own component, which is to say it's not dependent on anything. We're going to do the same thing in here, roadway 11, or RD11, which are going to appear here. Boop, boop, boop. Now that's, oh sorry, that's the second floor, so that's not really relevant to this. We're just going to concentrate on these ones, but there's two elevators in this building, so this is the second elevator being set up. See? Top elevator. But this is really all we need in order to define our elevator. The res LOD, the roadway LODs, and the geometry LOD. Okay, it's important. Then we're going to come down here into CFG models, class CFG models, class, oh, we're going to make our own class, class Fisk Tower. In here, we're going to declare those same skeleton parts, which is this here for that elevator. Then we're going to declare our animations. Our animations are what we want component 1, the component that all of them are linked through, to do. And in this case, we want it to move along Y, which is upwards. We're going to name it elevator up, which is also the class name. The class name is kind of irrelevant at this point. It's going to be acting on component 01, which is associated by skeleton, by links, these skeleton links to all these other components here. It's going to go to memory. This is asking if it's got a point in the memory LOD. We're going to say yeah. It's got 1 for yes or true. Minimum value of the distance it can travel, and the maximum value of the distance it can travel in meters. And then, of course, this is the same thing for the second one. So really, you just need one of these for each elevator. Whoops. One of these entries right here to move your elevator. Now we got to go over to the .cpp. We're going to continue to talk about the tower, which is right above. See, here's the hospital clinic, and here's the tower. So on this tower, first we need class animation sources. This is where we link back elevator up in the model CFG. And these are, this says how long it's going to take. This is who can activate it, which is any player, basically. And how long is it going to take before it actually starts doing it? So, for instance, are you going to click it and then it takes 3 seconds to start? You know? And then, of course, the same thing again for the second elevator. Now, here are the user actions in order to activate the animation. User actions go in the same place. Again, we're in strategic CFG vehicles within the mod CPP. Class elevator up is going to be, display name is elevator up. This is what appears in the actual scroll menu. This is the memo 1. Remember, we created a single memory point. Boom. That's memo 1 that we already defined. And that's where it's going to be related to. And 8 meters is how close you have to be in order to see this. Now, meters feel a little bit more like feet in Arma, so keep that in mind. Only for players 0 to This is to say it's only for the person who created it, but since it's going to be introduced by the mission patch, this would lock everybody out of it. So 0 instead of 1. And then we got, again, we've gone over this once. We're going over it for the second time because it's important and complex. We have the condition, which is to say this elevator needs to be at least halfway down in order to get the elevator up option. And then the statement here, which is animate elevator up and go 12.9 feet, meters, you know, whatever the Arma unit of distance actually ends up being. You're going to have to tweak with this value. Obviously, 12.9 was not something I just said, yeah, it looks like 12.9 meters. I put it in, and I tried it a couple times, and it broke, and I tried, and it went through, it went too high or went too low, and I had to, you know, go back and forth in the editor a couple times to get that working correctly. But once you get it correctly, once you get it dialed in, that's it, it's done and it's there. And then elevator down, obviously to bring it back down, is to say it has to be more than halfway done with the animation phase of elevator up, and then you want to return it to a 0 position, which is where it begins in the model, or where you've placed it in the model in the P3D to start. So this would execute the exact same animation, except in reverse the same distance, bringing it back home. Elevator up and elevator down. Those are the user actions. That's it. That's how you animate an object. Now, obviously, that is not trivial. That is not simple stuff. But once you've got the Model.cfg, and I want to also make a note here, don't binarize the scripts. Don't binarize the CFG, or else it won't work anymore. So when you're in your bin PBO or using PBO Manager or whatever it is you use, make sure that you tell it, please don't binarize .cfg files, or it will basically get rid of your model CFG and turn it into a bunch of zeros and ones and make it unusable, and then you'll find your model doesn't work correctly at all. So remember not to binarize model.cfg. Otherwise, you can binarize pretty much anything you want. Binarizing your sounds doesn't usually go too well either, but I think it already knows not to do that. I digress. Don't binarize this, and it'll stay there right next to it, and then when you go in and you load this mod in editor, it should work just fine. As an example, let's take a quick look at the towers. Loading it back in, just chilling in Tanoa. Got my Audi and everything. You can see you get the message when you start to look at the item that's associated with everything, and as long as you're in the distance, in the radius of the memlod, it's not actually looking at the memlod, it's being in the right area for whatever the object is that's all associated, as you can see. So then you click it, just like you click any option, and boom, off you go. Now this is what I was saying about the multiple floor roadways, is you need a couple of them because you do sync, and if you just have the one, then a lot of times the lag on an online server, which this is, will drop you down through the ground of the elevator and you'll fall to your death, which if you've played Arma 3 Life and you've messed with the lakeside towers, you've probably experienced that. So this is much less likely to dump you to your death, and once you start to look around, it'll put you on a reasonable lot. Boom. Look at that. A working elevator, everybody. If you don't mind, I'm going to chill out, sit down for some Netflix and chill, and I'll catch you guys on the next tutorial, you know. I know that this was a huge wash of information in a really short period of time, so of course, any questions you have, just put them down in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. If I have a ton of recurring questions, I'll go ahead and do another tutorial to try and answer any questions. But for now, I hope this gets you started on making some buildings and some really amazing new content for your Arma 3 server, or whatever, just for the community in general. Until next time, guys, I'm Gaddington. You are not. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, and if you do, name it after me. Deuces.